So, one of the new pieces of research, which is very interesting, is the impact of positivity on infection rates with colds and viruses. And the researchers looked at levels of negativity first and how they impacted on infection rates and real symptoms, like they weighed the Kleenexes to see how much they weighed. They actually looked at perceived symptoms, but the level of negativity didn't have an impact. However, the level of positivity was very important. So people with higher levels of positivity had much lower infection rates of colds and flus. Their hankies weighed much less, and their perceived symptoms were much lower.
My work involves both executive coaching, working with CEOs and senior executives, as well as research. And I love research because I think that research illuminates so much of what it is that coaches could do. I'll give a very simple example, which is that coaches are very often dealing with the beliefs and attitudes that their coaching clients have. And it's really important for us to ask the question, how might beliefs and attitudes actually impact on people's well-being and on their health? So I'll give one example, which is a piece of research done by Becca Levy, a public health researcher at Yale University. She asked people very simple questions, and these were questions about their age stereotypes. For example, do you believe that as you get older, things are going to get worse? Do you believe that as people get older, life goes downhill? Do you believe that as you get older, a loss of physical well-being is inevitable? And what she found, controlling for people's actual health, controlling for people's actual medical illness, that people who had more positive beliefs about the way that they were likely to age and that the way that people in general aged lived longer. So this is just one example of a piece of research that has profound impact. The reason it has profound impact is because what it does is it speaks to the idea that the attitudes that our coaching clients have, and these are attitudes that we can help to foster or change or to facilitate in different ways, can have a real impact on people's health and well-being. I'm an emotions researcher, and I think the area of emotions is salient and completely relevant to what it is that coaches do. Coaches sometimes ask the question, which is, do I deal with my clients' emotions? And is dealing with clients' emotions relevant, or does it start becoming therapy? My response to that is really, well, what does the research say? So one of the studies that I'd love to draw on is an example of a piece of research that was spearheaded by James Pennebaker and has been continued and replicated, and it's probably one of the most widely replicated pieces of research that we have in science, in psychology. What James Pennebaker did is he asked a very simple question. He got an experimental group into a room and got a control group into a room, and he asked both groups to write. These people wrote for 3 days for 20 minutes a day. That's all they did. The experimental group was asked to write about something that had happened in their life that was emotionally relevant, that was emotionally salient, that was meaningful to them. The control group wrote about arbitrary things, for example, the cars passing on the street. And before these groups wrote, James asked them to define and to report on their levels of psychological health, depression, anxiety, and also physical health. For example, how often they'd been to see the doctor. What he found is that after writing for 3 days, 20 minutes a day, the experimental group, the people who had written about something that was emotionally relevant, emotionally salient, did better. Now, what was interesting about these results is 6 months later, 6 months after engaging in this very simple 3 times 20 minutes exercise, the people who wrote about things that were relevant and salient to them did better. They had better levels of physical health and better levels of psychological health. Now, how does this apply to coaching? It applies to coaching because writing, of course, is a proxy. It's a proxy for the need to bring about, to discuss, and for people to process emotions. And one of the most important things that coaches can do is to help their clients to process their emotions, to articulate their emotions, and to work through their emotions in a way that helps to follow the dreams of that client. I'm an emotions researcher, and one of the things that coaches often ask me is it relevant, is it important to bring emotions into coaching? So the answer to that question is, what does the research say? James Pennebaker headed a really area of emotions research called the expressive writing paradigm. And in this expressive writing paradigm, he does a very simple thing. He brings two groups of people into a room, an experimental group and a control group. The experimental group is asked to write about things that are emotionally relevant, emotionally salient to them. It could be things like, I'm about to go into a new job, how am I going to cope? Or, I'm about to lose my job, how am I going to cope? The control group is asked to write about arbitrary things, for example, the cars passing on the street. Before the writing, James Pennebaker, as well as other researchers who've replicated this work, take indices of people's psychological health, depression, anxiety, physical health, how often they've been to see the doctor. And what they find amazingly is that the people who engage in this very brief experiment 6 months later do better. How do they do better? The people who engage with and who write about their emotions in ways that their emotions are meaningful to them and who actually process their emotions have lower levels of depression, lower levels of anxiety, high levels of psychological well-being. They have been to see the doctor fewer times, but really interestingly is that the people who, for example, write about a pending job loss are actually rehired quicker. What's really interesting about this research is that it's not about the writing. It's about the going to emotions. It's about the processing of emotions. It's about the going through emotions that helps the coaching client to bring what is near and dear to them into intention and into change.